Okay, hi there. So, you got everyone? So I'm going to talk about misinformation, and I'm going to talk about half of my job on misinformation. So half of my time I spend working on tracking financially motivated misinformation. The other half I spend working on the larger scale, generally politically motivated, power motivated. Today is about power motivated. And this is about warfare. This is about what it means to be a nation state, what it means to project power as a nation state. And what people forget about warfare is it's really about persuasion. It's about influence, it's about belief, it's about decisions. It's not about the kinetics. So let's think about what that means in terms of nations. So in terms of nations, this comes back to what we agree nations are. And this comes back to the idea of Westphalian sovereignty, that nations have sovereignty over their own territories, over their own affairs. They can't interfere in each other's affairs. They have these ideas of equalities. And these ideas of ways that nations can affect each other, these instruments of national power, the dime model. And now most people think of diplomatic ways of affecting each other, military ways of affecting each other, and economic, but there's also information ways to affect each other. And all of these different ways interact with each other. So looking at the information part of that as an influence. Yeah. So traditionally information was one of those pieces, one of those ways a nation state would influence another nation state, and generally that was something that only nation states would do with each other. So you would have public diplomacies, the public affairs, the reaching out to each other, nations would communicate with each other, and that's kind of been a little bit blown up recently by things like WikiLeaks, where suddenly you have non-state actors being able to influence across nations, nations being able to influence each other across these huge boundaries. So thinking about what you're protecting. So the threats on information. So these are the definitions that Bruce Schneier gave recently on two different types of nation state. So looking just at the democracy, you have a bunch of things you agree, this common knowledge as a democracy. You agree who's ruling you. You agree that they're legitimate. You agree how your government works. These are things you protect. And there are other things that you disagree on, but you agree, you work through, that becomes your democracy. But if you attack those agreed things, that common knowledge, you're attacking that democracy itself. And we're seeing those attacks happening now. And a lot of the misinformation attacks we're seeing are attacks on the structure of democracies themselves. So how this happened? Information has been changing. So we're starting with things like monks and printing presses, where you have information being broadcast. It goes from one point to many. It's expensive to produce. Very limited number of people can produce it. Not so many people can receive it. And then you're moving on to things like the telegraph and the wireless, where you can now transmit to a lot more people, but again, the feedback isn't much. You get to television and people can write in. So you've got a large-scale broadcast where the only people really have the ability as individuals to broadcast are, say, presidents. And any feedback coming back is still under the control of the broadcasters. So, and it has time delays. You're talking maybe a day, maybe a week for that feedback to come back. And then suddenly we get to the internet. And today's the anniversary, so hey, happy birthday. But we're now at a point where somebody like Katy Perry has twice as much influence in terms of followers on the internet as the President of the United States, and has the ability to broadcast to those followers and receive feedback instantly from those followers, and respond and loop and increment on the messaging to those followers. So now what used to be a nation-state ability, that ability to communicate to another nation-state, to influence another state, nation-state, is now in the hands of individuals. So we're in this interesting new world. And we're in this interesting new world online where we're seeing all of these different types of players, types of actors in here. So the types of accounts we're seeing when we're talking about misinformation, and misinformation, thank you for the definition. So we're talking about misinformation and disinformation. The difference really is that disinformation is deliberate rather than accidental, but they're both a falsehood. But the falsehood isn't necessarily in the text or the image that's shown. It may be anywhere across the chain. It may be a misrepresentation of the person. So somebody, say in St. Petersburg, who's pretending to be a housewife in the American Midwest. It may be in attribution, in the timestamping. It could be anywhere down the chain of production. But the types of accounts we see in here, so bots. So 2016, we were seeing a lot of bot activity, generally used to raise the visibility of a piece of information, say a message, so that it becomes viewed by more humans, becomes viral. Not seeing as much now. Parodies and spoofs. So these are accounts that look like a known person. Parodies are deliberately, visibly fake. Spoofs are close enough that they might be mistaken. And then you have the sort of camouflage and deep cover, the things that are Midwestern housewife that isn't actually the Midwestern housewife. So either pretending to be a person or a group, either lightly disguised or very heavily disguised and persisting. And then takeover. So we're seeing a lot more takeover now. So this is where a real account is used. So either it's stolen or somebody sells their account for use within a campaign, because detection is now looking for bots, it's now looking for fake accounts. So just use real ones. So type of strategies we're seeing. So this is the 4Ds with extras. So Ben Nimmo listed the classic Russian strategy. So you're distorting facts. So we've seen a lot of that, especially around Crimea. You're seeing distraction techniques. You don't pick on the main fact that's been shown. You show something to one side. You're trying to divide. There's a lot of work on division. So this is attacks against democracy. We're seeing a lot of work where, say in America especially, you're seeing the left and the right at the same time targeted in an attempt to widen existing divisions, increase existing friction. If that doesn't work, you try to dismay. You try to attack the individuals who are fighting the misinformation itself, or you just dismiss. This is like a common Chinese technique of you just say, hey, this didn't exist. It didn't happen. And the misinformation itself. So a couple of classic examples. The Muslim rape gangs in Toronto. This was from 2016 Canadian elections. And this is classic text misinformation. This didn't exist, didn't happen. And the other one, again from 2016, these are early examples. This was where misinformation went physical. So these were fake groups. Two of the IRA fake groups set up. And one of the techniques was there was just like a trialing of let's see if we can take this into real space. So these two fake groups with opposing ideas had demonstrations organized for them in the same place at the same time. I think to see if friction can be created in the real world. There were a series of these. There was a pro and anti-Beyonce protest in the same place, same time, around about the same time as well. So this is some of what it looks like. And on the other side, the types of mitigations we're seeing. So I work a lot on, okay, it's very, very nice admiring misinformation and tracking misinformation and looking at it and saying, look at all these horrible graphs. What do you do about it? So you see a lot of fact-based detection, a lot of, okay, these things aren't true, the Snopes type refutations. And some have automated attempts, a lot of manual work. That doesn't work so well with things that are further down the chain, doesn't work so well with the division type work. So this isn't going to work on things like the Bernie Saunders coloring book, which was part of a misinformation campaign, because that's not misinformation, it's just part of a division attempt. It doesn't work with editorials, it doesn't work with sarcasm. And then the propagation-based. So you're looking at the content-based, you're also looking at the context. You're looking at how misinformation is spreading. So you're looking at detection across the bots, you're looking at detection across the virality. So real news tends to go out, be seen, and then die away. Fake news tends to repeat. There are different patternings that you can hunt for. And the type of challenges in that analysis, especially if you're trying to automate, and technology is not the whole answer before I kind of head off into this. So in this, really, there's a lot of it. It's coming at you very fast. It's the usual big data 4D problems, 4V problems. Volume, variety, veracity, and velocity. But in here also you have these cognitive fictions. So these issues where when you're looking at misinformation, it's really hard to work out what actually is true, to work out through a mass of alternatives. So there are challenges both technically but also mentally on handling this. And there's also the content challenges. There are new challenges starting to come through. I work in machine learning. That's one of my things. And we're seeing a little bit of automation, but we're also seeing a lot of deep fake coming through. So this example was, we think, hand-produced. I think it was the Yes Men. This was the first time we saw physical misinformation in the US for a long time. These were newspapers, fake newspapers handed out in Washington, D.C. earlier this year. But there's also the ability to generate content now without having to put as much effort into it. So it's coming through. So that's some of where it's come from. Am I okay on time? Okay, a couple of minutes. Okay, let's very quickly go through what we do about it. And what we do about it is start talking to each other. So there's all of these different views of misinformation. People talk about it, social problem and news source pollution, but there's also these views from cybersecurity, which are useful, and conflict. And we need to design and share responses across all of these different fields. We need language. It's been a hell of a time actually just defining misinformation. So this is a definition one of the groups came up with. We need to share in real time information across all of the platforms and groups that we have who are working on it. And there are a lot of these groups. We've set up 2 groups already. We have a standards group underneath Credibility Coalition. We have a group of InfoSec people working together. But we're connecting over to everybody, including government, industry, academia, on this. This needs to continue. This needs to continue because as defenders, we don't get to see the whole story. We get to see the bottom of this pyramid, the artifacts, the messages, the users. We don't get to see from the top down the campaigns being designed by the attackers. So there are a whole bunch of different pieces that each of those groups has to come together. And first thing we come out of this is starting framework standards. And off we go. Okay, so what we want to do and where we're going. Thank you.